All right, all right. Welcome to this day's KCP community call. We have quite a full house again. And yeah, so before we get started, the usual, this meeting is governed by the CNCF Code of Conduct, which basically boils down to let's be excellent to each other. So if you ask me, that's a pretty low bar. With that being said, we usually have a section here at the beginning of the meeting where we ask if anyone who is like a new joiner or hasn't been here in a while wants to introduce themselves. So if you want to say hi, now would be the time.
Hi, Movin. This is Dinesh. I'm new to the community, so this is the first day. So I work as a DevOps engineer in Genpact. Hi, hello. I'll switch on my camera. I'm just having a noise. Let me come out of that place. You can please continue. Thank you.
All right, welcome. We're very glad to have you. I'm glad to have you here. Okay, we don't have that many topics on the agenda, so let me dive right in because the first topic that we have is something that Stefan and I have been working on, and I think we haven't discussed it here yet, so we should talk about it briefly. And that is multi-cluster runtime and the KCP provider for it. So basically, I'm not sure if we talked about this on this call a while ago, but we've been working on implementing multi-cluster support for controller runtime. The motivation for that is obviously that we have a controller runtime fork and we want to get rid of that. And the result of these efforts basically have been something that's called multi-cluster runtime. That is not a fork of controller runtime anymore. It's an add-on, basically. So the repository for that currently lives here in this GitHub organization. I'm going to add links to the meeting agenda. But if you are on the mailing list for the Zig multi-cluster in Kubernetes, you might have seen that Kubernetes Zig multi-cluster is planning to adopt this. So location will soon change. How soon, I don't know, but just basically as a little note. But for the time being, this is where the code is. And Stefan, interrupt me if I'm saying something wrong. But basically, multi-cluster runtime is this idea of, writing controllers that reconcile against multiple Kubernetes clusters. With the Kubernetes clusters in this example, kind of obviously being KCP workspaces for us. But we wanted to build something that's portable and universal, so something that other projects can also use. So basically, that you can write one reconciler that is multi-cluster aware, and then you plug different providers in that to basically reconcile against, for example, Cluster API, against something like Gardener, KCP, or basically whatever multi-cluster solution you can think of. So very briefly, basically from a user perspective, the main change, here's a little snippet that I just wanted to show you. The main change is that in comparison to controller runtime, multi-cluster runtime introduces a new builder. And this builder basically helps you build, multi-cluster controllers. You can see here that the syntax is very similar. I would say primarily the types are slightly different. For example, here there's a multi-cluster reconcile func here, not a reconcile func, as you might have seen from controller runtime. But we're trying to keep the API, as similar as possible to upstream controller runtime, obviously, so that you can easily port your existing controllers and reconcilers to the new framework that basically lives on top of controller runtime. So if you see, for example, just here, this has a dependency on controller runtime because it's based on controller runtime and it's not a fork, as we've had previously with the KCP controller runtime. So That is multi-cluster runtime. And then obviously you need providers to plug in. So these providers, this should be something, this is something to mention. Providers are something that you plug in at into the code. It's not in like a plugin based system. You can't plug them in at runtime. Like you need to compile your controller with a new provider in there. But yeah, that's basically the situation for now, I guess, mostly because Go plugins aren't really good. I wonder if someone will go through the steps of basically building a provider that loads a Go plugin. But I'm not sure if that's going to be feasible at some point. Would be interesting to see. But for now, this is compile time stuff, not runtime stuff. But yeah, so obviously for the KCP perspective, the thing that is most interesting here is the provider that allows you to build KCP controllers, or the provider that you can plug into multi-cluster runtime to reconcile against KCP. So this is basically what this repository does here. And it's heavily work in progress. MJ, for example, found a bug that makes it, well, before the PR for it, basically unusable for any real-world controllers. So it's still very much in development. But basically, and we can quickly jump to my control plane. Sorry, not my control plane, my terminal. And I can show this in action. Just let me rearrange things. But yeah, basically this is... just 1 second. Doesn't want to start my KCP. But yeah, basically...
we don't see it, right?
Yeah, I know. Sorry, I was just preparing it, but it took quite a bit for it to get started. Okay, so this is KCP starting, you know this. So basically, there is a very simple example here. Okay. So this example code is, well, basically setting up the provider. So this is the provider coming out of the package that we have here, out of the module. And it sets up a new manager. This is also a multi-cluster manager, so not a controller runtime native manager, but it basically wraps the upstream type. And then you can see that it sets up a controller here. And you can see maybe in here, so this is the reconcile func. There's nothing KCP specific here. Like this whole example, it would work the same way if you plug in a different provider. That's the whole idea behind multi-cluster runtime. So the fact that we're plugging in the KCP provider here is basically, well, I don't know, implementation detail? Not really, but you might hopefully know what I mean. So yeah, and this controller, it just works basically against the KCP instance. So I am connected to my KCP instance. The example one I need to create. So this is and the provider specifically works for the API export virtual workspace. That's also something that should be mentioned because these are the ones, this is the endpoint you mostly would write a controller against. If you're interacting with KCP, well, reconcile your APIs, you set up an API export. This is, or what I would expect us to provide multiple KCP providers, depending on what exactly you want to reconcile. For now, there's basically this virtual workspace one, which allows you to write, I would say, the most standard controllers in KCP. So I have a couple of resources prepared in this example. So I create an API export. I create a workspace type that that automatically creates API bindings for this API export, and it creates a couple of workspaces. So we have multiple workspaces now, and we basically want to reconcile. In this very easy example, I'm not deploying a dedicated API. I'm just claiming config maps via permission claims. So we're basically reconciling config maps across multiple workspaces. So if we now run this example, and this command is also provided in the README, you'll see that it dynamically fetches the virtual workspace URL just for ease of use. But yeah, this will compile, and then basically what you can see is a controller doing controller things, or a reconciler doing reconciler things. But you can see basically that we have so we have the standard config maps that you have basically in every logical cluster, the CA certificate. And you can see that the name here is all the same, but it's reconciling different objects in different logical clusters. So yeah, basically this controller is now workspace aware, and it reconciles, or it reacts to events from multiple workspaces. And that is, well, the idea. So the provider is working in its basic functionality, and we're iterating on that to get it up and running and fully functional. So yeah, that's multi-cluster runtime and the KCP provider. Did I forget anything important, Stefan?
Don't think.
Okay. Any questions?
Yes, if I may. Will this include work to allow events in KCP? I think the current event broadcaster and controller runtime can't issue events in logical clusters. Is that
Yeah,
targeted at some point?
Yeah, there is a panic implement me in the places in the code where it needs to be put. But yeah, we have to support this, I would say.
The multi-cluster manager, it's a slightly different interface. So it's not the normal manager of controller runtime. So there's no cluster embedded. This was an old problem, I think, right? So you have basically the manager minus the cluster, and you have a get cluster method. So we can add a broadcast object per cluster in that get cluster. So I think this should make it work.
Yeah, we just, I mean, I'm saying here we just need to implement it. We need to implement it, but there's already an issue on the repository because, yeah, we have to add it.
Cool.
And yeah, essentially, eventually we would phase out the controller runtime fork that we have against multi-cluster runtime and this provider. But obviously, there's still work to be done. So yeah, let's see where this goes.
I also have a question.
Sure.
If we now put ourselves into the position of like others that would write multi-cluster controllers. From the example, my assumption was like, of course, it's only an example, but the KCP part is hard-coded into it basically at the moment. Right? It's like the controller like knows that it is KCP, like it has underlying KCP, or could this be abstracted away so that the person writing the controller doesn't really care what the cluster provider is?
It is abstracted. So there is a cluster string in the request. There's a multi-cluster request object, but it's just a string, and you use it to get the cluster object, to get a client and everything. That's the only change you have to do. Otherwise, so we call it uniform controllers. If you look on the website, those which are not aware, basically, they just know they run against multiple clusters, and there might be a provider, and that's it. And you can even run them without a provider, like the same code, and it just works as before. So the behavior without a provider is the old one.
So basically, the abstraction that Stefan is talking about is this in this request object here. So you can see that there's this cluster name embedded into the request, and this is coming from multi-cluster runtime. I'm messing up. Yeah, multi-cluster runtime. Sorry, from multi-cluster runtime, not from the provider. So the whole reconciler function here, like none of this has KCP specific code.
Yeah.
The only KCP specific code that you have in this example is basically like more or less this line here.
Which would be totally optional, right? Like for someone else writing a controller, they would only require the reconcile loop to write. It's just for this example. Okay, yeah, that was exactly my question.
So I did a thought experiment a few days ago. Basically, took a vanilla KubeBuilder controller and just converted it to this. So basically, it's a very much lift and shift change. So I expect that every compatible KubeBuilder controller and the controller should be able to just be lifted and shifted to this very minimal effort.
I mean, ideally, once this has been like accepted into Kubernetes and maybe has some traction, maybe we can also. I know that KubeBuilder has a plugin system. I'm not sure if there would be like a way to basically write a KubeBuilder initializer that by default sets up a multi-cluster controller. But future work. Okay. Do you have any other questions, comments? Okay, then we don't have any other topics on the agenda. However, I would like to basically say, okay, let's move on to any other business, open floor. Does anyone have a topic that they would like to discuss?
I would like to use a few moments of Stefan's time here to ask 2 questions regarding my pull request that might be interesting, if I may, while we're here. So let me just share my screen. So this is about creating new API version for our API, because we want to evolve the API exports. And I was confused about 2 things. Thing number 1 is whether we want to now change this to something or not. In Slack, it sounded like no. Here, it sounds like yes. Maybe I misunderstood it. I don't want to do too much in this PR.
And the code, like there's a map list or list map type or whatever it's called, right? So your code is hybrid at the moment. So I think it's better. It's better because it's not a map when the key changes every time when you update. So a map, the keys in the map should be constant when the values change. Like, and the value is basically the schema. That's why I think it makes more sense to split it into resource name and group. Now, of course, there is some redundancy, which we can validate that the schema name matches the name in the group.
Okay, so we want this in this pull request, actually.
We have to, I guess.
Yeah, else we need a alpha free for this one.
Okay, fair enough.
And it's, I mean,
and
conversions should be possible, right? Yeah, I mean, you can derive it from the schema. So
okay.
I think we have it in the name, so we just parse the name and that's it. The question is like, do we want to keep this as a hard requirement for now for schema to be like a same naming convention as it is now? Maybe
we have the naming convention. It exists.
Yeah, but in the future we might want to relax it. We can relax it, but for now.
Why?
I don't know. I'm asking if we like.
I don't think there's a reason to relax it.
Okay. So schema string stays schema in the proposed structure, and name group is parsed from that one and just pre-filled.
Yeah. On conversion, you mean? Yeah. And validated on creation. Yes.
And my other question was regarding fuzzing during the conversion testing. I didn't quite understand how fuzzing helps there. Fuzzing sounds like it's converting an object to, well, it's marshalling an object and then unmarshalling it again and checking if it's deep equal. I didn't quite see how this is converting a fast object from alpha 2 to alpha 1 and back to alpha 2.
I think
Maybe I
the
mixed it
fuzzing
up.
tests do that. They basically put random values into the object, and they call convert and convert
That I
back.
didn't see.
Hmm?
I only saw that it calls marshalling and then it checks if the marshaled bytes are identical.
I mean, this is also helpful for fuzzing, obviously. But I was of the impression that there is more.
So for those who are unaware, this is about right, we have conversion code between the two new API versions, or between the new API version and the old API version. And we do have very simple test cases where we check that if you have an API export in one version, we can convert it to the other and back, and we don't lose any information. And if I understood Stefan correctly, he would like to implement some fuzzing here to make the tests even better. Right?
So
And
in
there's an API testing library in
Yeah.
API machinery, right?
You provided me with an example. The problem is that the example uses a comment type that is common across all API versions. And we don't do that. We don't have a common API export. So maybe I just need to look harder. Okay, we don't have to.
Yeah, I mean, we have to look into this API testing thing and see whether it's helpful. I think it is. It was my memory, but it's some time I touched it last.
Fair enough.
Could be wrong.
Okay.
But the idea is to have a round trip test, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like first
This one-
inputs, forth and back, and check if
Yeah.
the same.
Yeah.
But from what I've seen, round tripping is defined differently in the API testing package than we define it here.
In which sense?
Round tripping in the API testing means runtime object to JSON back to runtime object.
I mean, that's one kind of round tripping, obviously. But there would be value if this also works as conversion. So I have the package in front of me, but I have to read, so I cannot.
Okay, yeah,
Okay.
no worries, no worries. Good, those are my two questions. Thanks. Giving back the floor to everyone else, if you have something. Or if you have
Right.
questions to this, PR. Probably not. Good.
Unless there are questions. One topic I wanted to briefly touch on, so we have it discussed here. We've got the release candidate for 0.27 a few, is it already weeks ago? I don't know, time flies. But we are basically waiting for one final change to land, and that is a feature flag for global service accounts. Global service accounts means that you can in the future use your service account that has been issued in like a specific workspace against other workspaces. That's something that's that so far has not been working. Service accounts have always been limited to the workspace that they've been created in. The work with scopes and forums has like allowed us to change that, but there's still a few bits and pieces missing. So we're disabling that feature by default for the upcoming release. There's a feature flag that we will provide. And yeah, that's basically just the update. Carol, I think you're working on the last PR basically, on the unit tests that are failing there.
Yes, exactly. I think it's taking the service account with the clusters, and it's failing on that. I try to investigate because it's failing still with the same cluster. So this is what I'm trying to fix. But yeah, I will push it like today probably.
Okay, great. MJ, you have a question.
So I'm conscious next time we're gonna meet in 2 weeks, and this is gonna land before that. What do we want to do with the 132 rebase, which is ready now, basically? Meaning, how long do we want to wait until we merged it to main to let it sit in there for a bit?
just after the release, no? What is the question?
Yeah. I'm
So
if
basically,
everybody's on the same page, yeah, that's why.
we could even create a release branch today, wait for the feature the feature flag thing, merge it to the release branch, and merge the rebase today. Even that would work, right?
The only thing I don't like about that is then the release tag is not on the main branch. Like it looks a bit odd. So
2 days not gonna change anything. As long as we're in agreement that once we cut the release, we can merge the rebase and let it sync for let's say 3-4 weeks. Like the mount stuff I want to get into the next release on 132 means I suspect we will be sitting in main for like 2-3 weeks at minimum if the next one. But yeah, okay, that sounds good. Just wanted to make sure we're on the same page.
yep, I think the idea was exactly this. So we're gonna like cut the release, and then we basically kind of open the floodgates on all the like bigger PRs, and we're kicking off the release cycle with the rebase, which is quite neat. So yeah. With that being said, does anyone have when you're merging stuff at the moment, be a bit mindful. Like, can we merge this before the release? And in addition, does anyone have any thing, like we talked about this a while ago, but just catching up? Does anyone have any fix or PR that they want to get into the release? Because now would be the time to say, hey, I have this or that issue. I haven't done it yet. Okay. Then we'll basically wait for the feature gate to land. And then I think we can go with the final release. By the way, has anyone taken the release candidate for test drive? I'm curious if anyone got the chance to deploy that already. Doesn't seem to be the case. That's all right. We tested live. So, all right. Any other business? Any other topic?
KubeCon in a few weeks. Should we try to get a dinner, lunch, breakfast?
That would be lovely. If you're interested and hearing this on the recording maybe, or on the meeting, and you're going to be at KubeCon, why don't you message one of us, like MJ, Stefan, or myself? Dinesh, yes, you have your hand raised. And you're on mute.
So the question is a bit different from the topic. So when I was working on the Kubernetes, right? So I have a query that we were using HPA, the horizontal pod autoscaler. Okay. So we actually wanted to use the same application in active and passive. Okay, like a load balancer. So the traffic changed, right? Presently, I see that Kubernetes was having active data. That was, but for our application, it's like we were using some Vault, okay, in the backend. So Vault we are using, and also we are using Jenkins as a pod, okay. So for our applications, we require something like if I am going to run like multiple Jenkins or multiple Vaults in the backend, the data need to be in sync, okay. So I observed that presently our Vault application or Jenkins application, it can't use the active passive in Kubernetes. So do you have any sessions on this? This is with the HPA, horizontal pod autoscaler.
I'm a bit puzzled about the problem. Would it be chance you could write it up in a Slack channel, basically, just to describe the problem itself? It might be.
Sure.
I think I get it, but I don't want to talk something south. So if you write a post in Slack, we can take it asynchronously.
Sure. How can I join this Slack channel here? Could anyone please share me the link? Actually, I'm new today.
So are you already member of the Kubernetes Slack?
No, today is the first day. I tried searching everywhere, and today is the first community call. I'm still searching. I will find it out.
I see. Not a problem. So you can
I
our
got the link.
documentation. Come again?
I think it's the correct link.
Yeah.
Slack links confuse me every time, but I think this is the one.
So if you're not on the Kubernetes community Slack yet, the link from Mangedas will, I think, get you an invite there. And then Simon's link or the Slack channel, that's gonna basically, allow you to join our Slack channel.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Okay.
And if you're looking for like more like things to basically look at, I mean, you found your way here already, so you probably have been to the KCP website or something. But there's also a link to our docs that has like a couple of like our links, YouTube channel, community group, the Slack channel link as well.
Sure, I will follow it on. I'll be part of this. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Do we have any other topic to discuss?
Maybe just ask if people would be fine. So we have a KCP contrib repository where we've been putting like all the content from conferences, things like that. And we're preparing one now for the London. And Robert did a good job to do a basically GitHub pages with like content for the workshop. And I was thinking maybe just to give a contrib repository, separate GitHub pages with content there. I'm just wondering if people would be okay with that. It's a bit different than the web page because it would be more potentially workshop content, links to slides. I think predominantly workshop content and friends. Or we want to roll it somehow into the web page.
Is it something we could put in the design of the docs? Like it doesn't have to be in the KCP repository, but like the MK docs stuff that we're using? Like I haven't.
It could be. What we are doing is that we have just a bunch of Markdown files, and they are being displayed on the web page currently through Hugo. But I mean, it doesn't make a difference whatever the.
So I'm bringing this up, or like I had this thought because I have been thinking about how we host documentation for the auxiliary projects that we've recently started. So for example, the API sync agent, the KCP operator, the current docs website is built from the KCP main repository. And we obviously don't want to like have to put docs for like the API sync agent or something into the main repository. Like they don't share the same lifecycle and all of that. So what I was thinking of is basically that we might get away with hosting all of our pages in the same design, in the same MK docs theme that we have for KCP. Then they would like our docs would be in a uniform, style. And I hope that we would be able to host all of that under the docs KCP.io domain. But I haven't looked into GitHub pages and vanity domains and all of that in depth. So I don't know if it's possible, but it would be cool. So at the moment we have docs.kcp.io/KCP. That's the KCP main documentation.
Mm-hmm.
It would be cool to have docs.kcp.io/contrib, docs.kcp.io/API Syngage, and all of these different pages. And if they were all in the same design, we could easily link to them from the main docs, and we would have like one look and feel.
Sounds like a nice plan. So, okay, maybe let's try to get it until KubeCon. But if we run short of time and we temporarily just host the GitHub pages in a contrib repo for the workshop, and after that tidy it up after one, would people be okay with that? Like, I don't want in a workshop give people a link from myself or Roberts or somebody else, like a GitHub pages saying like it would be better that the content after workshop would lead to the same place, basically.
Yep. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Okay, so we'll take Robert offline this one. So you might see some random GitHub page appear for the workshop in a contrib repo. And after that, if we make it in time for the same style, which I like the idea of docs team basically to be the same, we do that.
I think you might be able to do it by just stealing like the automation, the docs folder, like the scripts and all of that. But yeah, you'll have to see.
Cool.
Okay. Any further topics? All right, then. Dinesh, we're looking forward to your message on the channel. Just share your problem with us, and we can, discuss it in detail. And
Sure, definitely.
Awesome, great. Then, thank you all. Have a great afternoon or evening or night, wherever you are, and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
I can put sage in the Kubernetes contributors, right? Or Kubernetes-users.
These are not channels related to the KCP project, so you would want to join the KCP dev channel explicitly if you have questions for us.
Oh, okay, sure. Let me find that.
All right, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.